Hi everyone, and welcome to the next video in this series. In the last video we talked about my past and the situation from when I was 13 years old, how I found out that I had hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and the surgeries and other bits and pieces I've been through. Today we're going to talk about the present situation, almost a day in the life, an average day so to speak for me. So today is a pretty average day for me in terms of activities and things like that. So we'll start off with the kind of headline information. On an average day, I will have 100 dislocations. 70 to 75 of these on an average day are my patellas, my kneecaps, and the other 25 are made up of fingers, toes, elbows, shoulders. It's very rare that I have a dislocation on my left ankle. It's only happened two times, three, I believe, at the very most. And there are obviously some joints that I haven't dislocated yet, so right ankle, hips, things like that. So I wake up pretty early every day. And if we go back all the way to 0001 on the clock, then I don't sleep well at night. That's a combination of pain and dislocations. I do dislocate through the night, obviously turning over and moving around in bed when you're kind of semi-awake or not fully awake is not a great way to prevent dislocations and things like that. And I'll tell you, it's a lot better than an alarm clock when dislocating, because it wakes you up from semi-sleep or almost deep sleep to wide awake in a fraction of a second. So most mornings I'm up anywhere between 5 and 6 o'clock. The first thing in the morning is the pain. I'm instantly aware of how much pain I'm in. And coincidentally, it's important to say at this point that that's also what comes up at the last point at night as well. So when I get up in the morning, I normally have a cup of tea, or try to have a cup of tea. It can be a bit difficult managing a large cup of hot liquid with dislocations. And then through the day I'll do various activities. So for example, today I'm recording this video. I've also been working on some more designs and slogans for my tea mill shop, which is linked down below. And I try and plan out as much as I can in the days before the day itself, if that makes sense. So, for example, it is difficult for me, even though I live not too far from shops, it is difficult for me to get to the shops and particularly carry anything heavy back, so I try and order things in. I try and pace myself so that I don't have a very busy day and a quiet day before it, and after it I try and spread it out over a couple of days as far as I can. So the dislocations, the best way to put them is they happen when they happen. They're obviously far more common when you're trying to get up and move around. Embarrassingly, but totally honestly, it is very common for me to have dislocations trying to go to the bathroom. I know it's quite common for men to end up with, and ladies as well, to end up with red patches on their legs where they've been resting their arms and looking at their phone for 20 minutes while they're on the loo. But for me, I can be stuck on the loo for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours at a time. Every time I'm trying to get up, I'm dislocating, which is obviously not a good situation. Being totally upfront as well, on an average day it's not common, but there have been situations where I haven't been able to make it to the bathroom, and that is embarrassing for a 31-year-old man who is kind of semi in charge of his faculties as much as I was ever able to. And as I'm sure you can guess, I never leave it till the last minute to go to the bathroom either. I go regularly, so to speak, to avoid those issues. But still, you sometimes will dislocate, hit the ground, and in the process you'll then be thinking to yourself, I've got two choices here. I can either try and put the dislocations back and then go to the loo, or I can drag myself the short distance to the bathroom, and sadly there's no right answer with it. It can be a bit embarrassing, of course, when this happens, but I obviously am lucky that it's not an everyday occurrence or even every week occurrence. So my life in many ways is quite, in inverted commas, boring. I obviously don't do a huge amount. I don't go out and visit lots of places. I don't have a very big social life or anything like that because I can't. As difficult as it is for me to admit this, the pain and the dislocations very much rule my life. Some days I go to bed very early because I am absolutely exhausted, and by early I mean sort of 6 or 7 p.m. in the evening, which, even for small children, is a relatively early bedtime. Overall, when you look at the situation, it's very difficult for somebody who does not have a significant disability to really put themselves into the shoes of somebody like myself and quite how much that disability can affect your day-to-day living. So if I use an example, food preparation and things like that, that is an incredibly difficult task for me. I don't cook very often at all. When I do cook, it's incredibly straightforward and simple dishes. Why? Because I don't have the physical ability to stand up for an hour, even with the crutches and the braces, or 2 hours trying to prepare and carry things back and forwards and move things around. And as much as I could sit down in front of the oven and do things, I'm not a great fan of the idea of sitting down in front of a pan of boiling liquid. Another example of how my everyday life would differ from that of many other people is using the shower or the bath. So I don't stand up when having a shower, and because of that I don't shower every day. I don't even try and shower every day because showering takes a lot out of me in terms of getting into the shower, getting yourself adequately clean, and then getting yourself out and getting yourself dried off. Obviously, water, slippery surfaces, standing up for periods of time, it's not a good combination for somebody like myself who dislocates incredibly regularly, and particularly with the knees. And obviously when you stand up, although you're in a shower cubicle, for example, if you hit the glass with enough force, you would break it or go through the safety glass. So I'm sort of desperately keen to avoid that. So on an average day, as I said, I will have 100 or so dislocations. Sometimes the dislocations will be reasonably spaced apart. Sometimes you will have situations where you have a dislocation, put it back, and then a dislocation moments later because you're trying to move from the position that you were in. And it's what I almost call drumfire dislocations, where you end up with one after another after another after another. You can alternatively have multiple dislocations at once. So the most common situation where that occurs is I will have a bilateral kneecap dislocation. So one kneecap will dislocate first, so let's say the right one for the sake of argument. I will shift my weight very quickly to try and avoid falling. And that shifting of weight, that instinctive thing that we would all do when we're about to fall, will cause the left kneecap to dislocate, and from there I will then topple down. Now, when you're toppling, again, it's taken a long time for me to kind of learn to fight against instinct and things like that, but even fighting against instinct, there are basic things that your body is going to try and do. So one of the most obvious for a lot of people is to protect their head and things, because you can do a lot of damage, a lot of very serious damage, if you land on your face or part of your head or neck. So I will therefore put out an arm to stop myself. Putting out an arm like that will put a huge amount of pressure on the arm, all my weight at speed hitting the ground in a fraction of a second, and because of that I will often therefore dislocate a shoulder or an elbow or both, as well as fingers on that arm. So it is not uncommon for me to be on the ground with 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 or 11 or even more. I think my record so far is 12 dislocations at once. And in all honesty, in that situation, you really don't know what to do. You panic for the first few seconds, even when you've got as much experience as I do, because you want the pain to stop as quickly as humanly possible. It's so bad that it almost steals the breath out of your lungs, and you are desperately trying to get yourself back together, almost like a human jigsaw puzzle, as quickly as possible. For me personally, I have been kind of lucky so far. Well, lucky is a relative term, of course, but I've been lucky that I haven't landed in such a way that I've dislocated joints on both arms at the same time, other than fingers. because obviously if both arms were dislocated, then I would have to call for help, and I do have people around me that can help, but their knowledge and experience is limited, so sometimes, unfortunately, I do have to resort to calling for medical assistance. Now, one thing I am quite proud of is that I very, very infrequently have to call for emergency medical assistance. I will generally fight for hours, if necessary, to try and put dislocations back rather than call for help. On the rare occasions I do have to call for help, and we're talking more than a couple of months generally between calls, I will have them help me there rather than rather than going into hospital if at all possible, simply because, again, it's less effort for them, it's less work for them, it's less resources taken up, and from a selfish point of view, it's better for me to get it fixed then and there with their assistance and sometimes their medication than it is for me to lie there on a bed in the back of an ambulance with a dislocated kneecap or two dislocated kneecaps and dislocated shoulder and elbow, bouncing down a busy road full of potholes, which of course is not their fault, it's just the way the roads are, and it does hurt quite a lot. And once the dislocations are back in at the hospital, you've then got to get back to where you're staying, which is always arduous as well. So to kind of answer the final element of it, you're talking about post-dislocation pain and things like that. So obviously, as I've discussed before, I do live with chronic pain. I'm in agony every single second of every single day. It's just a fact of my existence now. Post-dislocation pain does occur occasionally. It depends on a couple of different factors. One of them is if you've suffered injuries during the dislocation. So obviously there's a lot of forces that go through joints during dislocation. So I have torn ligaments, I have torn tendons, I have torn muscles. There have been stress fractures and things like that caused in my knees and shoulders and elbows and things like that because of the force of the dislocations, or sometimes because of the way that I land during the dislocations. For a kind of average, in inverted commas, kneecap dislocation, the post-dislocation pain isn't really noticeable, particularly if you get it back quickly. For those who've been through a dislocation themselves, whether it's 1 or 10 or 1,000 or goodness knows how many I've been through now, it really is like hitting a light switch. So you're in agony from the dislocation, and as soon as it goes back, your body goes, ah. It's almost like coming home from a really busy day and taking your shoes off that you've had on for 14 hours, and that feeling of the relaxation and the peace you get from it. It's very similar with dislocations. However, sometimes if you have multiple dislocations at once, or if you have a bad dislocation that's stuck out of position for a prolonged period of time, then at that point the muscle spasm and the muscle guarding and things like that mean you do get quite significant post-dislocation pain. The only advantage of the post-dislocation pain that I found personally is that if, for example, my right kneecap's been stuck out for a couple of hours, and it can do because of how badly shaped the knee joint is itself. I really did win the lottery with my knees, folks. Because of that, you do tend to protect yourself even more on that side. So you might be more likely to dislocate your left kneecap afterwards, but your right kneecap might be kept in for a period of time, so to speak, because you're being very careful about how you're using that leg and the way you're putting any weight on it. Obviously, overall, I am as careful as I can be, but it is very, very difficult to consciously think about every single tiny movement that you make during a 24-hour period, let alone 24 hours after 24 hours after 24 hours. So that's an overview, basically, of kind of what it's like to be me on a daily basis. Dislocation numbers, the kind of basic tasks that I find very difficult, the bits and pieces that I do to sort of keep myself going and keep myself sane, the things that I'm obviously very limited with, and my experiences on a daily basis with dislocations and things like that. On a side bit of news, it looks very likely that tomorrow, so that would be Saturday, the 29th of April, there will be an article on me and my situation and my campaign in the Herald Newspaper in Scotland. Now, this can be accessed online, and it's something I'd certainly recommend doing tomorrow, because there's going to be a significant piece on me and my situation and what I'm fighting to change in Scotland, and that's something we will talk about again in future videos. So I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join me today and watch this video. The next video we will unfortunately be having a bit of a sad discussion almost about what the future's looking like for myself, and we're not talking a 30 or 40 year future either. We're talking, you know, in the medium term rather than in the super long or ultra long term. And then from there we will talk about other aspects of chronic pain, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome management, and various things that you can do, whether you are a sufferer yourself or whether there's somebody in your life that's a sufferer, and ways you can help them, or ways that you can help people even if there is no one in your life who suffers with chronic pain or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and you just want to get involved and try and make the world a better place for people with a condition that sadly is underdiagnosed, underrecognized, that there isn't really any kind of treatment program for or management program, and it's just very kind of ad hoc bits and pieces, and that's obviously not the best way for things to be managed. So once again, thanks very much folks. I hope you have a lovely day, and I will speak to you soon. Bye.